All right. Hi, Divya. Okay, so I will share my screen. Today we're going to try using a pair deck. Do you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Perfect. So join this pair deck link. So just go into joinpd.com, enter in GORUEK, and I will wait for some of you to join. Okay, so Kazi, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly. Feel free to unmute and correct me. Can we have the link in the chat? So just go into joinpd.com and then enter in GORUEK. Oh, we technically have 88 slides. That's a lot. So first, we're going to start off by asking you if any of you guys have any questions. So this is completely anonymous. You can ask any questions, I don't know, about the class, about any course content that we learned about yesterday. Any Python questions in general, just put them here.
I actually missed out on yesterday's class and I'm yet to watch the recording, but I do have 2 years of Python experience, so I think it shouldn't be too hard, would it?
Nope. Yeah, so our class is kind of designed for beginners, but we do move at a pretty fast pace. So I think you should be all set to go. So yesterday we learned about variables, just printing out stuff using conditionals. So like if statements, elifs, else statements, along with like less than, greater than, like all those like symbols, as well as comments.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. So let's go through and show responses. How many years have you been coding? So I've actually been coding since so it depends on what you classify as coding, but I remember when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, I would use these like drag and drop blocks on like Scratch. If you guys have never used Scratch before, definitely check it out. Eric can send a link in the chat. So yeah, that should be around like 8 years. That's a lot. But from actually writing code, that's probably in 6th grade, which is probably a bit closer to 5 or 6 years. How long does it take to understand the basics? To be honest, more practice will help out in the long run. So at the start of this class, we'll do some review, which should help. But just challenge yourself over the next couple of days to try to keep up with everything that we're doing, try to code outside of our class, and then that should kind of get you going. Can we use anything other than Python for the hackathon? Absolutely. So you can do whatever you want. Remember, hackathon is where we basically create projects that can solve problems that pertain to like the themes or the tracks that we will present to you during the opening ceremony. So you can definitely do whatever you want for the hackathon. Now, the reason why we're covering Python is because it's a little bit easier to kind of teach Python than Java or any other computer language. So with Python, if you were to print out something, for example, can you guys see my screen? If you were to print out hello world, you just write print hello world. Now, if you were to use Java, and if you're just focusing on Python, don't worry about this. You would use like system.out.println and then hello world. So it's a little bit more complex, and we just basically don't want to bog you down with all this other stuff while we're just getting started. Just learning the like command print something to output something in the console, I think that's a lot easier. At the end of the day, though, really the algorithms that you'll learn are basically like the same for Java, Python, or whatever. So it's kind of like this more logical thinking that we're trying to get you guys to learn instead. What's the easy way to understand the binary codes? Don't worry about binary. We just want to make the point that computers basically communicate in ones and zeros, and we can write code, which will basically get translated into that. What was your first hackathon experience? Actually, I don't know, but I do remember there was a hackathon that I went to back in 8th grade that I really loved. It was called Metro Hacks. It was in person, met a lot of new people there. I wanted to have a team, but I didn't. So in order to form a team, I met a lot of very interesting people. And if you guys are absolute beginners and you don't have any friends that are joining you this weekend, don't worry. You can meet new friends in our team formation Slack channel. Best way to get comfortable with coding language, just continue coding. So try to create projects on your own, attend hackathons just like Hack3, where you try to use your coding language, and keep in mind that no one knows the answer to anything, or no one knows the answer to everything. If you're just trying to solve a math problem, there's an answer to that. But if you're writing code to solve a solution or something, you can do it in 100 different ways. So there's really so many different ways that you can get to the final product, and you can just use Google to help you out. Just continue doing more and more and more. Any advice to first-time hackers? Continue doing what you're doing, attend these classes, keep meeting new people on Slack, try to finish your entire first hackathon, do it like all the way through, and then try to go on to more hackathons after this. As for like first-time hackers during the event, keep an open mind, keep using Google, and remember that there's no like correct answer to any given thing. So you can solve something in like 100 different ways. And so even if you can't seem to find the solution to something, just try something new. Does a project that we have to make be based on a theme? Yes, so we'll basically present 3 different possible like themes or tracks for you to do. Just do along there. It should be pretty open-ended, so you should be able to find something in there that you can do. Is coding required for the hackathon? Ideally, it is something that works. So ideally, it's not just here's like a Figma, or here's like, I don't know, like Microsoft Paint, here's like a mock-up of what would happen. You can certainly submit those things, but ideally you start coding a little bit and have like some buttons that actually work on your website rather than just like a mock-up of your website, something like that. Do we have to submit the completely finished code in the hackathon? What if we don't finish it? Can we still submit it? Absolutely. So judges are not looking for something that is 100% done. They're looking for some progress that you've made. Sometimes it means that you have like a working prototype. Other times it means that you just have your idea and you have some code and you've tried. And judges will see into that. Remember, we do judging a little bit differently in a sense that you will be put into like a Zoom session where you can interact with other judges. So they will ask you questions, you will answer questions, you'll talk about your challenges. What they want to see is like your true authentic self. Did you actually learn something like during the event? We're not looking for you to create like the next Google or Amazon. We're looking for you to create something small that it has like some meaning or some impact on your local community. So it doesn't matter if it's like completely perfect or anything like that. You should still submit it, and you can still win some stuff. All right, so first question, what are different variable types? And you can answer through paired X. So if I were to answer this, one example I would give is an integer. So an integer is just a whole number, basically, something that is not a decimal. So what are some other variable types? All right, so let's take a look. We have strings. So strings are just basically, it's called a string because it's like a string of different characters. So strings are basically text. We have integers, which are just whole numbers, as I mentioned. Floats actually mean, actually refer to like the floating decimal point. So floats just mean decimals, and Booleans are true or false. lists and arrays, we will cover those later today, actually. So remember, when you're setting a variable in Python, you just need like x is equal to, and then whatever you're setting it to. You don't have to know if it's like a string or an integer or a float or Boolean or whatever. This is just cool information to know. All right, so another thing that we are going to be adding on today is variable modification. So we can start off with like x is equal to 1. We're just basically setting the variable x to be 1. And now we can modify that variable so that x is equal to itself plus 1, which would make it to be 2. So if we are if we're modifying a variable, we can do like x or whatever the variable is equal to itself. We can add something onto it if it's a number. If it's a string, we can basically do something called concatenation, which is like adding 2 different strings together. All right, so another question, what are some of the conditionals that you can write? So one example would be a double equals, not a single equals. So if we are to compare like text or numbers or something, what are some different conditionals that you can use to compare them? Right, so let's take a look. We can use double equals, we'll compare equality. So remember, in an if statement, when we say like if x is equal to 0, if we're seeing if the variable x is 0, we actually use a double equals. And the reasoning is if we're just setting if x is equal to 0, then we're basically setting x to be 0. Not equals, so if we have this exclamation mark equals, that also works. A single greater than, less than, or greater than or equal to, we can add on this equal by just adding that on at the end, or this less than or equal to. We can also use and to basically add multiple conditionals together. We can use or, so that in the same way, or we can use not as well, or we can actually just use an exclamation mark for not. So that is what we just mentioned. So as a review prompt, we want to create a program that takes an input from the user. The program will ask, what time is it? The user enters time from 0 hours to 23. So 0 being like 12 at midnight. If the hour is from 0 to 6 inclusive, then we should output, you should be sleeping. Else if the first statement isn't true, and if the hour is from 7 to 10, then output, it is time to wake up. Else if the hour is 21 to 23, output, it is time to sleep. And then if none of that is true, we output, it is time to do stuff. All right, so I'm going to copy this prompt. And let's put that in a replit. So here I have my replit already open. You guys should have signed up for an account yesterday. And so remember, we can copy all of this stuff, do a control/ to make it as a comment. So we want to create a program that takes in the input from the user. So we can ask something like the time is equal to input. What is the current time? All right, so what is the current time? And we would enter in like 0 or something like that. And it doesn't really do anything right now. So we're setting a variable x to be the input. So because this is an input, it does store it as a string, and we want the time to be a number, right? We can compare less than or equals to with numbers. So we're going to put int to force that as an integer. All right, hopefully that works. And then print time. So if we have 2, then it would output 2. So we're basically just printing it at the end to make sure that we're storing it as a variable correctly. The next thing that we want to do is if the time, or actually instead of time, let's call it hour, because I feel like that would be a better descriptor. If the hour is greater than equal to 0. So we're first checking if the hour is from 0 to 6 is greater than equal to 0 and hour is less than or equal to 6. Then we want to, and remember to use this colon at the end, print, you should be sleeping. So remember, we can use greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, and we're using this and statement. Basically combine both of these together. So print, you should be sleeping. So let's test this right now. So one of the parts of programming is like, you want to always be testing. You don't want to write this huge 200-line program and then it doesn't work and you don't know what is the part that isn't working. So what is the current time? 2, then it should say you should be sleeping. Now, what if I say 8? Then it does not output you should be sleeping because this statement is not true. Now we want to check an else if. So if the first statement isn't true, then we want to check a second statement. So that's when we use an elif. So normally we would use an else to basically use it as a catch-all, but in some other languages they call it else if. So else, then you check something. Python just lets us combine it as elif. Elif, the hour is between 7 and 10. So we're saying is greater than or equal to 7 and hour is less than or equal to 10. Print, what is that? It is time to wake up. It's time to wake up. And then if the hour is between 21 to 23, greater than or equal to 21, and hours less than or equal to 23. Print, it is time to sleep. And then else output time to do stuff. Print, time to do stuff. All right. Okay, if you guys have any questions or anything, please just send it into the chat. Okay, I do not see any chat messages right now. So let's test it right now.
I have a question.
Yep.
What if the user by mistake inputs a number greater than 23? So do we write a condition for that?
Sure. So right now it'd work for everything else. So let's say if hour is greater than 23, print, you are stupid. This is impossible. Okay. So what is the current time if I say like 25? The hour cannot be greater than 25. If it is 23 and it says it is time to sleep, or we can have just done like, so right now we're checking if it's less than or equal to 23, or we can check if it's less than 24, something like that. What if we check something that is between 10 and 21, like for example, 15, it says it's time to do stuff. So when we're entering 15, it's not between 0 and 6, it's not between 7 and 10, it's not between 21 and 24, and it's not greater than 23, so it says time to do stuff. So we can basically use these like nested if statements all together. That way we're entering like a number, it's basically going through and it does something based on what we want it to do. Let's check the like answer key, I guess. And yeah, it's basically what I had. Can you please repeat what is the difference between else if and else? So let's have something simple like, so number equal to 0. If the number is equal to 0, print number is 0. Else print number is not 0. So in this case, we're basically entering in like the number is 0. And then if we're entering any other number, then, so for example, if the number is 1, then it would say that the number is not 0. So this else is basically like a catch-all statement for everything. So if the number is not 0, as long as it's not 0, then it basically will do this. Now, what an else if statement does is let us check if like the number is greater than 0. So number is greater than 0. And other programming languages call it else if. Python calls it elif. So then it says that the number is greater than 0. We can also use another elif. Number is less than 0. Print number is less than 0. So basically, elif statements get called when the first if statement does not happen. So it first looks number is 1. Is that 0? No. We're going to check elif the number is greater than 0, which is true. Does that kind of make sense? So an else statement is like a catch-all statement for any if or elif that like is not true. Then that's when the else statement gets called. Elif statements basically let us compare different like things while it not comparing the first if statement as well, right? So, sorry. Yeah, so basically an elif statement only gets checked if the first if statement was not true. And then an elif statement happens. And the difference between elif and else is like else is just catch all for everything. So is it possible to keep using if until else? So this elif basically tells us, so this elif statement is basically linked to this first if statement. This elif statement is linked to both of these first if statements. So we can have like complex chains where at the end it says like else, and then we print impossible or something like that. But if we just simply used if statements in here, then it would say that the number is greater than 0 and then impossible. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, so the usage of like elif basically allows like the creation of longer chains of if statements where we're checking multiple conditions. And that's where like these else statements come in. If you have more questions, Zainab, you can stay after class and we will code together then, okay? In the meantime, we have to move on.
Okay, so now I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so we will be talking more about Python. So first, math. You can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with integers and floats. So for addition, you would just use the plus symbol. For subtraction, you would use the minus symbol. For multiplication, you would use an asterisk. For division, you'd use a forward slash. For a remainder, you'd use a percent symbol. And for powers, you would use 2 asterisks. So for example, if I print 10 plus, and in parentheses 5 times 2 minus 3, and then divide by 4, this will print out 11.75. So in Python, order of operations is followed. So first it does the stuff inside the parentheses, and then it does 5 times 2 minus 3, which is 7, and then 7 divided by 4 is 1.75, and then you add 10, and that's 11.75. And if I do 5% symbol 2, this percent symbol is the remainder. So if I pretend this is instead 5 divided by 2, you'll get 2 with a remainder of 1. So that's why it prints out 1, because the remainder is 1. And then if I do print 2 double asterisk 3, that will print out 8, because the double asterisk is to the power of. So this is 2 to the power of 3, which is 8. Okay, and now loops. So pretend you have a car that is dirty and you want to clean it. So while the car is dirty, you will clean it for a minute. And then you also keep track of how many minutes it takes. So the car is dirty, that is the condition. So while that is true, then you'll keep on cleaning it. And minutes is the iterator, and that keeps track of how many times the loop has happened. So in Python, loops are a way to repeat a section of code over and over. And there are two main loops. There's while loops and for loops. So for example, if I have an integer x and I set it equal to 1, and then I have a while loop where the condition is x is less than 4, and I print out x, and then I have x plus and equal to 1, that is the same thing as x is equal to x plus 1. So this will increment x by 1 each time. And then at the end, I'll just print the loop ended. So if I run this, it'll print out 1, 2, 3, and the loop ended. And so what happens is first x is 1. So this x is less than 4 is true. It'll print out 1. And then it'll add 1 to x. So now x is 2. And it goes back to the condition. And since 2 is less than 4, that's true. It'll print out 2. And then it'll add 1 to x again. And x. And then 3 is less than 4. It'll print out 3. And then it'll add 1 to x. And now x is 4. And since 4 isn't less than 4, the while loop will end. And then it'll print out that the loop has ended. And then also, there are things called for loops, which are just while loops, but more condensed. So if I do like for x in range 3, print x, range gets the numbers 0 all the way up, but not including the number that you input. So range will include the numbers 0, 1, 2. So it'll print out 0, 1, and then 2. But if instead I have 2 values in the range, like 3 and 6, this time it will print out the numbers from 3 to 6, including 3, but not including 6. And then if I have 3 different numbers in the range function, the first number is the starting number, so it starts at 3. The second number is the ending number. And then the third number is how much you increment it by. So first, it'll start at 3, it'll print out 3, and then it'll add 3 to 3. So now it's 6, then it'll print out 6. It'll add 3, so it prints out 9, and then it'll add 3 again, which is 12. But since 12 is greater than 10, it won't print out 10. And then this loop finishes. So now we are going to use a while loop or a for loop to print out these number sequences. So 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 3, 7, 11, and 15. So first, let me copy the prompt over. All right, so for 5, 6, 7, 8, I'll use a while loop for this one. So I can first set a variable x to 5, and then have a while x is less than 9. And then I'll print out x, and then increment x by 1. So now if I do this, it'll print out 5, 6, 7, 8, because it'll print out 5, it'll add 1, then 6, add 1, 7, add 1, 8, and once it's 9, this condition is no longer true, and then the loop will stop. And for 3, 7, 11, 15, I'm going to use a for loop. So I'll have the for x in range. It'll start out at 3, and then it'll go up to 16, and it goes up by 4 each time. And now if I just print out X, it prints out 3, 7, 11, 15. Okay, now lists logic. So pretend you have a list of items on a piece of paper that you want to buy from a grocery store. So you can add items to that list. You can also remove items by crossing them off. And you can add another list to the end of this current list. You can also count how many items are on this list. And then if you're like done with the list, you can just toss the piece of paper into a trash can so that the list no longer exists. So in Python, lists are objects that can hold any type of variable and any amount. So for example, if I have a groceries variable that will hold like all the groceries that I want to get for a list, you would use a open and then square, and then closed square bracket. And then if I wanted to add something to that list, I would do groceries dot append with my item. So that could be like an apple. And then say I also want to buy a banana. So then I'll do dot append with a banana. So right now, what the list looks like is something like this. And so apple, it's at index 0, and banana is at index 1. So lists in Python, the first item doesn't start at index 1, it starts at 0. So if I wanted to print out what item is first in the groceries list, I would do print groceries at index 0. And if I run that, we'll print out apple. And then if I want to find the second item, I'll do groceries at index 1. Now it will also print out banana. And you can also loop through lists. And you can do that by doing for item in groceries, and then just print out the item. And it'll loop through them all and then print it out. And this item keyword, it can be anything. So it can be like also X in groceries. And then if I run that, I'll also print it out. So what happens is whenever it goes to like one item and then sets that item equal to this keyword that you use. And then you can use that keyword in this for loop and print it out. So some of this functions are dot append, which we just used, which adds the item to the list. We can use dot insert, which will insert an item at a certain index. So if I wanted to insert something at the beginning of the list, I would insert it at index 0. Dot extend will add a list to the end of this list. Dot pop will remove an item from a certain index in the list. And then length with the list as the input will tell you how many items are in the list, and dot clear will clear all of the items from the list. So for example, if we do groceries dot insert at index 0, and I want to insert tomato as something that I want to buy. And now if I print this out, tomato should be at the front, and also get rid of these print statements. Now it's tomato, apple, banana. And then pretend I have another list of like other things that I want to buy, which are like potato and grapes. And instead of using dot append, you can also just add items like this. So now I have a others list that has potato and grapes. And if I do groceries dot extend with the others list, And I print this, now will be tomato, apple, bananas with potatoes and grapes at the end. And then there's the pop function. So if I do x equals to groceries dot pop, like the item at the front, it will delete the first item from the list and then set that equal to x. So right now, if I run this, there won't be tomatoes anymore. And also, if I print out x right here, the x variable is holding the tomato. And just to make it more clear, I'll comment out this for loop, and yeah. And then there's also the length function. So if I do print length of groceries, right now groceries has 4 items in it, so that's why it will print out 4. And then I can also do groceries dot clear, and that will basically remove everything from the list. Now if I do dot length after that, it should be 0, because that means there's nothing in it. And also if I run this for loop, nothing's going to be printed out. Okay, now functions. So in math class, you can have a function that's like f of x equal to x plus 3. And if you input 3 into the function, it'll output a 6. And if you input a 10 into the function, it'll output 13. So functions usually take in an input, do something with it, and then produces an output. So functions in Python, you can use to divide your code into useful blocks. And functions are defined with the keyword def at the front of the line, followed by the function's name, and then parentheses where you can add arguments if you want. So for example, hold on, I'm just going to comment out everything. Okay. For example, if I had a function that's called say hello, and all it does is it just prints out hello there. I can now call the function by just doing say hello. And then if I run it, it'll print it out. So this line will call this function, which then calls this line in the function and prints out hello there. And then you can also add arguments into your function inside the parentheses. So if I want to make this more complex, say it takes in a name, and it does, instead of hello there, it does hello there, plus the name, which we have to make sure to turn it into a string, and then exclamation point. Now if I do say hello and put like my name, it will say hello there, Erickson. So it will take my name as an input into the function, and then it will add that to the string and then print it out. So that's how you include arguments into your functions. And then also functions can return values. So pretend I have a function that just multiplied 2 numbers together. So I'll call it multiply. And it takes in a number A and then also a number B. And then I'll just return A times B. So now if I do x is equal to multiply 2 and 3, and I print out x, it's going to equal 6. So first, this 2 is inputted to the function as the variable a, and the 3 is inputted into there as the variable b. It multiplies them together and then returns them. So then x gets set equal to what is returned, so 6. And then once I print it out, it'll be 6. So now what we're going to do is create a function that takes in an integer. And if the integer is positive, it'll print out a plus sign. If that number is negative, it'll print out a minus sign. And then if that number is 0, it'll just print out a 0. So I'll just call this function sign, and it'll take in a number x. And now if x is greater than 0, I'll print out a plus sign. And then else if x is less than 0, I'll print out a negative sign. And then else, that means it has to be 0. I'll print out a 0. And then now I can test this. So if I say input the number 0, it should print out 0. And then if I input the number 14, it should print out a plus sign. And if I input the number negative 13, it should print out a minus sign. Now, classes and objects logic. So pretend you have a company and you have a bunch of users' accounts. Now, these accounts probably have similar frameworks, like they include the user's username and their password, and their email and their age, and like something that sends a password reset email. So in Python, that would be an object and classes. So objects are a way to hold variables and functions together as a single entity, and classes are just a template for your objects. So pretend I have a class called student that will hold like student information. So I have the name of the student. I'll just set that as my name, maybe the course that they're taking, like algebra, and then what grade I have in that course, so maybe a 96. And also I can have a function here, which is def, like say hi. And for all functions and classes, you'll have to include this self keyword. So I can do print hi, my name is, then do self dot name, which will take the name variable from this class and then add it to this string. So now if I have a variable like x and set it equal to this class by doing x is equal to student with parentheses, I can print out what is stored in that class. So if I wanted to print out the course variable, all I do is x dot course. And that will print out algebra because that's what's stored in the course variable. And if I wanted to call this say hi function, all I would do is x dot say hi, open and close parenthesis. And now it will say algebra and then hi, my name is Eric's son. Okay, and classes in Python also have a special init function. And that's called when a class is being created, and it can take in arguments and set them as values. So, for example, instead of just setting these variables, I'll delete them, then have the special init function, which is 2 underscores init, another 2 underscores, and then you have to include the self keyword. And then after that, I can take in a name variable, a course variable, and a grade variable. And then now I can do self dot name equal to name. So I can take in those variables and then set the name variable of this class to what was inputted. And I'll also do self dot course is equal to course and self dot grade is equal to the grade. So now, instead of having no arguments in this student class, I can have my name as the name argument, and then algebra as the course argument, and then 96 as my grade. And I can also do make another student like a different variable that's y, instead have this as like Jonathan, and do Jonathan VA. Maybe the course this time is chemistry and he has a grade of 98. So now I can also print out his. So if I run this, it'll print out the student class that's holding me and algebra, and then it'll print out the variable y's information, which is holding Jonathan's information. So back to that like company logic thing, maybe they would have a class that's like user, and then it would hold username and their passwords and everything. And then you can set them all to all the different users that are using that site. So now I have some exercises that are a tiny bit more complex. So first, list of numbers. So we want to have the user input 6 integers and then add them into a list. And to input, you use like the input function. And then you want to use loops and loop through the list to find the minimum and the maximum value, and also the mean of the 6 integers, which is like the average. So for example, if they input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the min would be 1, the max would be 6, and the average value would be 3.5. So I'll create a list variable called numbers, and then I'll loop 6 times so that it asks the user 6 different times to input something, and I'll do numbers.append. So it adds that number into the list. I'll make sure to turn their input into an integer, and then I'll do input with the question or with the statement enter and integer. So now I can just run this to make sure it's working and enter integer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this runs 6 times, and it should have added all of these numbers into this numbers list with the .append function. So now I can have a variable that's called like min, and just set that equal to the first number that's in this list. I can also have a max and just set that as the first number in this list. And then also a sum variable that's just set to 0 for now. And now I can loop through this list with a for loop, so like for number in numbers. And then to see if it's like a min, I can do if. So if this current number that this for loop is looking at is less than the min that I currently have stored, that means it's smaller, which means this would be the new min. So I can do min is equal to this number. And then I can also do the same thing for max. If this current number is greater than what I have stored as the max, that means it's the new max number. So I'll set max equal to this number. And then also I'll add this number to the total sum. So now if I print out the min and then print out the max, and then for the mean, it's just the sum divided by the total numbers, the total amount of numbers, which is 6. So sum divided by 6. Now if I run this and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it'll say that the min is 1, the max is 6, and the average is 3.5, which is correct.
Sorry to jump in here. If you guys are watching and you're confused by line number 113, sum plus equals number is just, it just means that sum is equal to itself plus the new number.
So it looks like that. It's just condensed as that. Yeah. And also, yeah, this is some really complicated stuff. So don't worry if this is a tiny bit confusing. And then now there's another problem, which is a list of cars. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a car class that has 2 variables, a model the model of the car, which is going to be a string, and then the cost of the car, which is going to be an integer. And then it also is going to have a function that prints out the model and cost. So for example, if the model was Toyota and the cost is 2,000, it'll print out Toyota :space $, and then $2,000. And then we're going to create a list that contains these two cars, a Toyota that costs $2,000 and a Nissan that costs $1,500. And then we'll loop through the list and use the car class's print function to print out the info of the two cars. So we'll define the new class, which is car. We'll have the special init function, which will take in the model and the cost of the car. So I'll do self.model is equal to the model, and then self.cost is equal to the cost. And I want to make sure this is an integer, so I'll surround the cost with this int, which will turn it into an integer. And then I'll also have that print function that, okay, and then I'll also have that print function that prints out that information. So I'll print out the model of the car, then plus a semicolon space with the $sign and the cost of the car. And I'll make sure to surround the cost variable with a string to turn it into a string. Oh wait, and also this is self.cost. Yeah. Okay. So, and now I'll create that list. So I'll just name it cars. And then I can add those two cars, which were a Toyota that cost $2,000, and also a Nissan that costs $1,500. And now I can loop through this list by doing for car and cars, and then I'll do just car.print, which will use this print function that is part of the class car. So if I run this, yeah, it'll print out Toyota and it costs $1,000, and Nissan and it will cost $1,500. Jonathan, do you want to do the modules?
Okay, sure. So I realize we only have 5 minutes left, so I'll keep this nice and quick. Modules are basically something that you can import. So imagine as like a set of code that's already created that you can basically import. Let me get my replit open. So I wasn't too sure about the timing, and I will do this as if you were coding a project in your hackathon. So I know that Eric went through a ton of stuff. So we covered like functions, which are basically, imagine math functions. You insert something and then you have a predefined set of code that basically processes it. Classes, which are like collections of data. And it might feel like a lot. And so I didn't want to like bombard you with even more information. But basically in Python, there are things called modules. So you can, so Amy says she has to go for something else. Can you send the code for the class in the chat? Absolutely. So we'll email these out later tonight with some more explanations and stuff. So for example, we can import time. And this is something that I know that already exists. So theoretically, if you did not know, am I screen sharing, by the way?
Yep.
Okay, so if I did not know, I could say Python time library. And so this is basically what programming is all about. You can just copy and paste code off the internet and figure out how things work. So seconds is equal to time.time. And let's print seconds. So we see here that the first second ever was January 1st, 1970. And then, so we basically import this already predefined set of code called time. It's basically built into Python. You can find a variety of different libraries online and use all of those. Say like the seconds is equal to time. This is basically referring to that library. And this library has a bunch of different functions, one of which is called time with parentheses. So we're basically saying, so this time without parentheses is basically referring to this library. And then we're calling this time parentheses, which is referring to the library or the function in the library. In fact, we can even import libraries as like import time as time library. And then we can copy and paste that there. So we can say like the time library dot, and then this dot, as we learned in classes, just basically refers to something that is built into the class. So basically, yeah. I just want to point out that basically you can go through a ton of different libraries online to kind of learn a lot about all these different things. You don't have to write the code for the libraries. You can just import them and then use them as you need. And you can put them in here and create programs, which will add a lot of different functionality. So I know we're basically at time, so just wanted to mention that libraries exist. These are also called like modules. For these, you shouldn't really be memorizing, like there should be like whatever this function as part of some like library or something. Really just use Google to your advantage. You can find 100 different links in here. This is the Python actual documentation. You can go through and basically read what each of these functions does. For example, I can just copy and paste that get clock time. And it requires this clock ID, which I would then search up more information about. So I know we're at time. I don't want to do too much. I'm going to stop right here. Okay, so let's end with some takeaways. So today we learned about math. We learned that you can add things using the plus symbol. You can subtract things using the minus symbol. You can divide things, multiply things. And then there's also the modulo symbol, which basically refers to the remainder. So if you have 5 modulo 2, then you would have 1 as a result, because 2 goes into 5, and then there's a remainder of 1. So that's just the percent symbol. We learned about loops. So we can start off with a loop to basically go through something until something happens. So we can set like the variable x is equal to 0. And then within the loop, while x is less than 10, we can add 1 to x each time and then print out x, which would basically give us an output of 0 to 9. We learned about lists, which are just collections of different data. Imagine like a shopping cart. You have a list of different things that you want to buy. We learned about functions, which are basically just predefined sets of code. Imagine that in math, f of x is equal to 2x. So if you insert 1, then you get 2. If you insert 2, then you get 4. Functions are basically just predefined sets of code. They can take in arguments, like different variables and stuff, and then they can manipulate those. And it allows you to organize your code a lot easier so that you don't have one huge file with 1,000 different lines. You can organize those into functions, and you can also save code by having multiple things use the same functions. And then we also learned about classes and objects, which are collections of different data that we can store. So we'll email this out later tonight as well. Make sure you check your email, check your spam at like tomorrow morning if you still don't receive an email, because we will send an email. But your homework is to create a class called animal that stores its name as a string and its age as an integer. And you'll have access to the list of cars challenge that we did earlier. You need to have a function within its class that prints out its name and age in 1 year. So for example, if there is a dog called Otis and its age was 10 years old, then it should print out Otis will be 11 in 1 year. You also have to have the list that contains these two animals. So for example, Otis with age 10, George with 20 years old. And so if it were to print out George, it would say George will be 21 in 1 year. Then it has to loop through the list and use the animals print function to basically print these out like we did earlier today. So in doing so, you will use math because you will have to add 1 to the age every single time. You will use functions because we will have to have a function within the class. We will use classes. So this should be a pretty nice review of everything that we've done today. If you can figure out how to get this to work, then you are all set for the class tomorrow. If you have any questions, remember you can reach out to Eric and me through Slack. Thank you so much for coming. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you, guys.
Right. Any questions?